Welcome to the Dancing Coke Can tutorial. First thing we need to do is open up Maya. I'm using Maya 2017. Make sure you locate your folder. You should have your folder Maya Coke Can files. Make sure that they're all the same as what I have. Alright, so here we have the Maya user interface, or UI for short. Let's take a quick tour through the interface. Go up to the top area here in the upper left, and you'll see you have the menu here up at the top, and then you have your shelf. We're not going to be using much of this because this is a very simple introductory tutorial, so I'm only going to take you through the more salient features and the most basic of the parts of the menu. But you can see here where it says modeling. We want to start with that and make sure that that's set. If you click on the arrow for the drop down, you'll see you have your different modes here. We want modeling. In case yours is on rigging or animation or FX, this is the one we want, modeling. All right, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our cylinder. The cylinder is one of the primitive shapes you see here on your polygon shelf. And so you have a sphere, cube, cylinder, cone, plane, torus, it looks kind of like a donut or an inner tube, a pyramid shape, and I have tube shape, and text. Okay, we're going to, as I said, use the cylinder. So the cylinder, you can go ahead and click on that and it'll appear in your perspective window. Now in Maya you have different view panels. So if you look here over on the left, you'll see these are the different panels that you have as a choice. The top one here is the perspective, the panel layout of the perspective view. And you can see that it has a perspective. It's 3 dimensions. And over here right below that you have the other panel layout, which selects the other views. Okay, these are called orthographic views. So you have on the upper left here, you have the top view in the Y direction, and Y being one of the directions in 3D. In 3D, the D stands for dimensions. But you can also think of it as directions. You have the X direction, you have the Y direction, and you have the Z direction. Now normally the way we look at this is X is left to right, Y is up and down, and Z is forward and back. Now before we go any further, I need to take you through the basic controls for moving your view. And when you're moving the view, and you people who are gamers will be familiar with this, you're moving the camera that's viewing it. Here in the perspective view, you're looking at this with what's called the default camera. Go ahead and hold down the Option key on your keyboard, or if you're in Windows, the Alt key. Hold that down and then simultaneously hold down the left mouse button. And when you do that, you'll see you have that little cursor with the rotating icon. Okay? When you do that, drag the mouse left to right. Remember, you're holding down the left mouse button and the Alt or Option key at the same time. And that allows you to rotate in all these directions, left to right and up and down. If you move your mouse up and down, you can go this way, or you can rotate it in all directions. You can go like that. Okay? So let's rotate it this way so that the X is going to the left and right, and it's slightly tilted this way, so you can see the 3 dimensions very well, but X is left and right. And then release the mouse button and the Alt and Option key. Okay, then it goes back to the regular arrow cursor. We also want to know how to move it in 3 dimensions. We want to be able to move the camera up and down and right and left. So again, hold down the Option or Alt key and simultaneously hold down your middle mouse button. You'll need to have a mouse with a middle scroll button or select button and then move up and down. I'm moving my mouse up and down and left and right. So I'm going in the X direction or I'm going in the Y direction. All right, and you can see in the perspective mode it's moving. Now we also want to be able to move in and out, and this is a dolly move. So we're dollying in and out. If you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, you can just go forward and back with it like this, scrolling up and down or in and out. But another way to do that is to hold down the Alt or Option key and right mouse click and then drag it to the left or right. If you do up and down, it does the same thing. Any movement that you make makes it go in and out. Okay, and that's dollying in and out. You're moving in three-dimensional space. You're not just zooming in. As you can see, the perspective changes a little bit as you go in. Okay, so to review, left mouse button and Option key, Alt key, and that rotates in 3 dimensions. Okay, but we want to keep the X direction left and right, Y direction up and down, Z direction in and out. Okay, so you got X, you have Y, and then you have the Z as we go along this line here. And we don't really show the Y direction on the grid, at least the way we have it set up right now. So you have, again, the Option Alt key, left mouse button to rotate this direction, and again, you're moving the camera in space to do this, but it's the same distance away from the object. And then to move the camera in 2-dimensional space, up and down and right and left, you hold down the middle mouse button and the Option Alt key. And then to dolly in and out, you're scrolling with your scroll wheel, or you're holding down the right mouse button and holding down the Option Alt key. Same effect. Okay, so let's return it back to this central position. So go ahead and practice those a little bit till you get used to them. The next thing you need to know is how to move the object itself. We know how to move the camera now, but we also need to know how to move the object. So first of all, when you have this default cursor that we've been using to select, you can click off the object and deselect it and then click on the object and you're selecting it. That's because we're in the select mode. See up here in the upper left. That's the select tool. If we go down one, then we see that's called the lasso tool. So you can lasso select things like in other programs you may be familiar with. Then we have the paint selection tool, and when you select that, then you see you have these vertices which indicate the intersection of the lines on the object. And using this paint tool, you can just like a paintbrush select anything that you mouse over. But if we also want to select what's in back, then we have to move it around so we can see and select them. To deselect them, you can hold down the Control key and paint over them. That will deselect them. So just remember the Control key is your deselect key. And I'm going to deselect these as well. Now I could have also just, here let me undo, hit the select button and then clicked off the object, and that would deselect the vertices as well. The next tool is the Move tool. But in order to use the Move tool, well, the way we want to, I mean, we could select a vertex with the Move tool and move it up like that. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves at this point. Or you can select a bunch of them and move it. And I'm clicking off to deselect. Let's go back into the object selection mode. And the way to do that is go up here to the upper left here and select by object. And you can see that the shortcut is F8. So, and you can see it's gone back to our wireframe mesh. Now I'm going to get out of the Move tool by pressing the Q key, which is a shortcut for the Select tool. You can see that as we look at our cylinder, it looks like a three-dimensional object, and part of the reason it does is because it's in the shaded mode. It acts as if we have a light shining on it that gives it an appearance of three-dimensional depth. And the shortcut for that view is the 5 key on your keyboard. Now press the 4 key and see what happens. See, that puts it into the wireframe display mode. And when you hit those keys, you'll see up here a little window that gives you a hint as to what is going on. So we can go back and forth between 4 and 5, the wireframe display and the shaded display. There are others too, but we won't get into that yet. Now look over in the upper right. You have the channel box layer editor. If you can turn your head sideways and read that, that might help you. And that shows you the attributes of the object that you have selected. Translate means where it's moving or positioned in the X direction, the Y direction, the Z direction, and that will change when you use the Move tool. And the Rotate attributes, whether it's rotating by degrees. Let me go ahead and do that. Let's use the Move tool and move it up and down and see how those attributes change on that. And now let's rotate it. This is the Rotate tool. The shortcut for that is E. So you'll get that icon here. And we can rotate in the Y direction, meaning that we rotate around a Y axis. We can rotate in the Z direction, which means we're rotating around a Z axis. And we can rotate in the X direction, meaning we're rotating around the X axis. And as I do that, you can see all these different attributes or parameters change. So I'm going to take it back to 0 by pressing the Z key. You can undo things by pressing Command Z or just the Z key. All right, next let's go to the Scale, and that's this one right here, the Scale tool. The shortcut for that is R. And you can see here you can scale in any direction. You can scale in the X direction, which is coded by red. The Y direction, of course, is coded by the color green, and the Z direction is coded by the color blue. After you've selected it, it turns yellow. See? And you can scale in all 3 directions by clicking on and dragging the center one. You can even have it implode on itself and go the opposite direction. And as you can see, that changes our scale attributes in equal amounts. So I'm Zing back. Okay, I think that's a pretty good introduction to the Maya interface for what we need at this point. Let's go ahead and make this into a Coke can shape. First of all, we want to scale it up in the Y direction. You can see this can is not to scale of a Coke can in the Y direction. So we want it to be a standard 12-ounce can. So we're just going to rough this out. I'm not sure what the exact scale is on a Coke can, but I'd say it's probably about double this. So we can either scale this up by clicking on the Y scale direction and taking it up. Let's look over here and we can see that scale Y is really close to 2. Let's just go ahead and click on that field and type in 2 and enter. Okay, now you can see that it's exactly 2 times the size in the Y direction that it was originally. I want to point out down here, we've looked at this, but I haven't really explained it. Down here in the lower left, this shows you and orients you to where you are in the perspective mode. So if you find yourself like this, you're on the back side. If you find yourself like this, you're on the bottom. Okay, and just to kind of keep us straight and in the same direction, let's keep it so that the X is going to the right, and again the X is the red, the Y is green, and the Z is blue. I showed you a little bit about the panel layouts. Again, the first one here is the perspective mode. That's the one we're in right now, and you can click on this one and see the orthographic views along with the perspective view. So you have the top view, which is looking down in the Y direction, the front view, which is looking in the Z direction, and then the side view, which is looking in the X direction. What I'm doing here is I'm using the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. A shortcut to bring it full is to press the F key. So any panel that you're viewing in and you have your mouse over, you can just press the F key and it'll bring it full. This is a very good tool and a good practice for you to bring something full, and maybe you've lost it or something like that and you can't find it real quick. Just press the F key as long as it's selected. It has to be selected, and so the software has to know what to bring full, and then you can just position it if you need to move it back. And again, that's the scroll wheel, or you can use the Option key and right mouse button to do the same thing. And I also should mention that the shortcut for toggling between the perspective view and the orthographic view, the 4-panel layout I should also say, is just to press the space bar. Okay? And you can, whichever view that you're in with your mouse, you can press the space bar and it'll bring that one full. So the front view and the side view, again the top view and the perspective view. Go ahead and press the Q key on your keyboard to go into the select tool, or you can click on it here up in the upper left. What our agenda here today is to now introduce you to textures. We've got you in the basic operation of the interface, and then we're going to do some real simple modeling beyond what we've already done in scaling. We're going to texture the outer skin of the cylinder here with the Coke can label. We're going to texture the top and the bottom with photos of Coke can top and bottom as textures as well. So that'll give you a good introduction to the way textures work. But before that, we're also going to model the top of this just a little bit. Textures are a fantastic tool for making things realistic without having too much detail and too many polygons. The problem with having so many polygons is that it requires more computing power to render it. That's why it's important when making models for games and animating them that you keep the polygon or poly count to a minimum and then use the textures to make them more realistic, even photorealistic. Now we're going to do some simple modeling on this, and it works best if we go into either the side or the front mode. So press your space bar and let's go into the front mode. Okay, and select it. And if it helps, you can bring it in a little bit closer using your scroll wheel. So what we need to do here now is do some cutting on it. And to do that, first let's press the 4 key so that we go into the wireframe display, and go up to your mesh tools and go down, and we're going to select multi-cut. Click on that, and you see you have now the cursor is turned into a blade. We're going to cut in places on this model so that we can then sculpt it a little bit and change the shape just enough to make it look more like a Coke can. Plus we also need to cut it in order to do some of the animation we're going to do later on. So first of all, we want to cut up here at the top to create a little bit of a lip near the top rim. So when you mouse over it, you can see you have this it kind of jumps to the different vertices. But we're going to click right here, just down a little bit, and click next to it, all the way across. And just try to keep it as reasonably straight as you can. And then we'll fix it later if it's not perfectly straight. And then let's go into the perspective mode and then rotate it around, hold down the Option key and click and drag with the left mouse button. And you can see we're about halfway around, but we want to go the rest of the way around. So Let's just continue around, keeping it at about the same distance. Now we have to rotate it again. And then make sure you're right at the origin there, and it'll bring it all together. Okay, so you can see that some of them are a little bit lower or higher than the others. We want to keep them uniform, but we'll take care of that in a little bit. Let's do another row in addition to that, and then just press the Enter key, and that ends that particular set of cuts. Now we want to do another one. So let's start again a little bit lower, about the same distance, and we're going to go all the way around doing the same thing. And it's okay if you're a little bit off as far as distance is concerned. We'll fix that. Now again, when you get back to the origin, hit Return, and that ends that particular set of cuts. All right. Now let's do the same thing. We're going to do it a couple of more times, just above the middle, and then we're going to do another set just below the middle. And what that does is that gives us a nice place for when we animate this. We're going to make it dance, kind of bebopping. And that gives us places in the skin for it to bend. Otherwise it won't bend properly. Enter, and let's do another one right below. Enter. And let's do one more at the bottom, because we're going to have it curve inward a little bit at the bottom. So right about there, about the same distance as we did the other one at the top. And click on the origin and enter. Okay, you can see they're pretty wavy there, but we're going to fix that right now. So the next thing we want to do is go into the Select tool, or you can press the Q key and right click on it. We're going to go into the Vertex mode. Right click on the object, go into the Vertex mode over there, and you can see these vertices. So that we can see through this, let's press the 4 key, and let's just click and drag a selection box around these first. Okay, and you can rotate and you can see, okay, I just want those in this particular set of cuts. And we're going to even those out. The way to do that now is to go into the Scale tool. R is your shortcut. And we're going to scale these in the Y direction down to the origin. Okay, and now see how that straightens them out so nicely. See, they're perfectly even now. Let's do the same with the next one down. Again, make sure you only have the vertices in that row, and then do the same thing, down, scale down to the origin, and you can see it nice and straight. Let's do that with the bottom row that we just got. And it's down and nice and even. And another way to see what you're doing is, again, go into the one of the orthographic views. Let's go to the front view, and you can see how nice and straight those are, the ones that we've straightened. And now let's do the same with the top two rows. Okay, but we have to just do them individually. Make sure, again, I'm going to press the F key so I can go in real tight. And make sure again that you have just the ones in that row of cuts. And the scale tool down to origin. Whoop, but look, see, I've got two of the wrong ones there. So Z, press the Z key and undo it. And then undo again, and then we can just select around. Since we're zoomed in, we can select just around the ones we want. And then scale down to origin, and they're nice and even. Now let's do the same with the top one there. And scale down, nice and even. Okay, so now we have the Coke can the way we want it for the time being. And let's select just the top two rows here. Now, see, I go back and forth between the orthographic and the perspective view. You can also work in the 4-panel view if you want, but it's a little bit harder to see and tell what you're doing because they're smaller. So I like to toggle between the views. Now we've got the top two rows selected of vertices, and we have the scale tool. So let's mouse over the center of the scale tool and click and drag it to the left. And what that does is that gives us a little bit of a bevel going inward to give the can some shape, like a real Coke can. Now let's go back into the front view again, and let's just drag a selection box around the third level of cuts and press the W key for the move tool, and I just want to move this down a little bit so it gives more of the effect of a real Coke can. A real Coke can has a little bit more of a bevel than what we had. Let's go down to the bottom row and take a look at that. We want to bevel that in as well to give it sort of a curve. Let's look at it in perspective. Remember the R key for scaling? We want to scale that in just a little bit. Just give it a little bit of a curve like a real Coke can. Now a real Coke can also would have in the lip, it would be recessed down. We're going to rely on the texture to do that. We're not going to cut it in, and because we don't want to, at this point it's getting a little too complicated for the first tutorial to get into that too much. But we'll just leave it at that, and then like I said, we'll let the image give us that sense of depth. So press the Q key for select, and let's go back into the object mode. You can do that either right clicking here and select the object mode, or you can go up here again and click on this button that goes into the object mode. Now that we've gotten this far, we're about ready to add texture to it. But first, whenever you're ready to save, you need to create a project window. So you go up to File, then down to Project Window. Okay, and what that does is it creates all these different folders and other attributes for that particular project that you're working on. In this case, it's the Coke can. That way it'll automatically save into the folders that you need it to save it into, and it creates a new folder. So you can say the current project is the default. I like to save it into my own area rather than have it to go into the default area under Maya projects and documents. So we're going to create a new path. So click on New, okay, and that unghosts this folder, and then click on that folder and you can navigate to where you want it to save. Okay, so I'm going to navigate. This is the select location window. I'm going to go to the desktop, and then you can see in the desktop, I have this folder Maya Coke Can Files. Double click on that and that opens that up. And we're going to save it in there. These are some of the textures and we'll look at that. These are what we're going to be putting onto the Coke can and a reference as well. So go down here to select and select it. And then now we have that project window. Let's name it Coke Can _ can and click accept. Now if we navigate to that folder, you will see that we have this folder Coke Can and with all those folders for the attributes and the other parts of that project that we're going to be putting in there. I want you to take a look now in that folder and you see that we have the can bottom that I told you about, and we have the can top, and then we have the reference for the can, and then we have the label itself. That's what we're going to be wrapping around the can. And right here I have some data as far as the attributes of the can and the textures. So as we talked about before, it's 2 grids wide, 4 grids tall, and then we put the textures on, and these are the different settings that we're going to have for the UVs, which are the attributes and the settings for the labels. The main label, and then we have the top texture and the bottom texture. Let's create materials for this can. We're going to go into the face mode to do that. But first, let's toggle over to the front view and let's center that and bring it up by pressing the F key. Again, remember you have to have it selected in order to do that. First of all, let's create a shiny texture for this whole can. So right click on the can, go down to Assign New Material, and then you'll see the Assign New Material window. Let's select Blend. That's a shiny material. And you'll see over here, and see we've got all these different tabs showing the history of editing we've done in the modeling. We want to get rid of that. So let's go under Edit, Delete by Type, and then select History. And see, then it narrows it down to just the ones we want, the P cylinder 1, P cylinder shape, and blend 1. Blend is that material that we selected. But first I want to rename this. Let's change the name from P cylinder to can. Okay, and now it's can shape and blend. Let's take that blend and let's rename it aluminum. Aluminum. And we want to see that texture in our window, so press the 5 key and then that shows us the shiny material we have. Press the space bar. Let's go back into the perspective mode, and now you can see you've got that shiny material on there all around, top and bottom and around. And as you rotate it, it gives you that kind of shiny effect. Okay, and we can change that. Make sure you have the aluminum material selected. Make sure also that you're in the attribute editor in case you get out of it. There's the channel box and then the attribute editor. And in order to see that, you have to have the can selected. Okay, and we can brighten that color a little bit if we want, make it a little bit brighter by moving the slider. And we can also add a little bit of extra shininess to it by doing the eccentricity. And we can change the size of that specularity. That's that shininess is the specularity. And you can see it change in the sample, but you can also see it change on the object. So you can play around with it and choose what you like. I think that setting that I have is pretty good. That's just for the main material of the can. We're also going to make some changes for the label. Okay, now that we have the basic material set, let's go back into the front view, and we're going to add another material on which to place the main label. So on the can, right click and go into face mode. Okay, and as you mouse over, you can see each of these polygons, in this case the rectangles, that you mouse over indicates that it's ready to be selected. You can go into the wireframe mode and look at it and see, you know, wherever you select over or mouse over, it indicates that that's where you're at, and that's what can be selected. So we select it and it turns into this kind of dot matrix green thing. Now, I want to deselect it though, so either hold down Control and select it again, or you can select off of it, or you can just press the Z key and unselect it, deselect it. Now let's select with a selection box just those 3 sets of faces, and this is going all the way through. If you toggle over to the perspective view, you can see that now when you select like that, it selects through the object, not just the front surface. If we want to select just the front surface, we would use the paint select tool, which is this one right here. But we're not doing that this time. All right, so now take a look, make sure that you've got just the ones you want selected. And next we're going to add that texture of the label onto that skin. But first we have to create the skin. So right click on the object, doesn't matter where on the object you right click as long as it's the one on the faces that you have selected, and go down to assign new material again. And again, we want something shiny. We could use Blinn again, or we can go to Fong or Fong E. There are also shiny materials. Let's choose Fong this time. And you can see it should pop up in your attribute editor. Let's rename Fong 1 to Label. Now you can see we could change the color. If you click on that color chip, there are different choices that we can make on that color chip, but we don't want to do that. Instead, we're going to add a texture, and that's what these little kind of checkerboard looking icons are for. So go over to just to the right of the color chip and the slider, click on that icon. That opens up the Create Render node. Okay, and what we want to do is, we have this choice of all these different kinds of textures, but what we're going to do is we're going to use one from our file. So we're going to click on File, and then you see over here it goes to File 1 in the attribute editor, and you'll see this little folder down here. And what that does is that allows us to navigate to our folder and find and apply our label. So click on that and then navigate to your folder, Maya Coke Cans, and we want the Coke label. That's the one. So click on that, it should be at the bottom. Click on Open, and there it is. Okay, but in order to see that, we have to go into the texture view mode, which is the 6 key. Press on the 6 key. Now you can see you've got a texture on there. Go into the perspective mode, press 6. Now as you can see, you have the Coke label is laid on the texture there. Yours may not look the same as mine. I've got different parameters set. So what we need to do now is change those parameters for the texture, and so that it wraps properly around the skin on this can. And that's what these are for. So over here we have repeat U 4. So let's enter that in over here. And if you don't have this showing, then what you need to do is go down in your channel box, click on Place 2D Texture, and then scroll down, and then you'll have your textures showing here. Okay, so we're looking for repeat U. Okay, so that's it right here, repeat U. Let's type in 4 units. Okay, and you can see it changes this. And then let's go up to repeat V. We're going to enter 2.8 in repeat V. 2.8. And that makes another change. So it's looking a little closer to the way we want it. Next, we want to offset it at 11/100ths and the offset U. So offset U, let's type in 0.11, and that wraps it in the U direction that we want. And then offset V will be 0.1. So we'll go to offset V, type in 0.1, and that's exactly now the way we want it. So we're looking pretty good. Let's now put the texture on for the top. In order to do that, we need to select just these faces here on these polygons. And instead of doing the select mode, we're going to do the paint select mode. So go over here to paint select, click on that, and that allows us to mouse over and then select just the ones that we want. You can see that my select circle is a little bit big, so I want to take that down because I don't want to select all these around the edges on the outside of that. I only want to select inside, and it's just set too big. So hold down the B key on your keyboard, and you can see that that changes the select icon, and left mouse button, hold that down at the same time and mouse left, and that makes it a little bit smaller. So now with the paint mode, we only select those things on the surface. So let's do that. Just mouse around there and then make sure that those are the only ones you have selected. If you're pretty sure about that, then now we can right click somewhere on the top, anywhere on the top. Let's go down and assign new material and release. Now this time let's select a blend. And you can see in your attribute editor you have a blend 2. Let's select that and let's rename it top. And one other thing at this point I want to show you is how to look at the hypershade and how to select that. So go up to the Windows menu, and the drop down, go into Rendering Editors. And hypershade is a very, very important window and tool. And you click on that, and then you'll get the hypershade. The hypershade shows you your textures that you're using in your project. And you can see we have the aluminum, which is the whole can, and the top, which we just created, the label, and the default Lambert material, and particle and shader. So if you happen to lose your material or don't know how to select it or get back to it, you can usually find it in these tabs, but you can also go to the hypershade and select it. So look, when I select the aluminum, that brings up the aluminum one here in the attribute editor. When I select the label, that brings up the label. And when I select the top, it brings up the top. All right, now I'm going to slide this back over to my other monitor. And now we have the top, and we're going to go ahead and apply that top. I want to make it a little bit brighter, so let's slide the slider up a little brighter so the sample is a little brighter. And we're going to go click on the texture and go into the Create Render node and again go to the File, and like we did before, we're going to click on this folder for File 2, and we're going to go and select the can top, and then click Open. And that applies the top, but you can see it's not set properly. So we need to change that. So let's again go to the Channel Box tab, click on the Place 2D Texture, scroll down, and then we're going to enter the parameters that we have in our data. So repeat U, we're going to want 3. So it's going to repeat that label 3 times. Repeat U, enter 3. And you can see it made the change. Then repeat V is also 3. Now you can see it's pretty well placed, pretty close. And we need to just make some minor changes now. We'll leave repeat U at 0. But we're going to change repeat offset V to -2/100ths, or -0.02. And that centers it there in the can. So we've got that, and then now we want to do the bottom. So let's go to the bottom. We still should have our Paint Select tool, and if not, go back up here and select it, and let's just mouse over only those faces to select them. Right click, go down to Assign New Material. Let's select another blend, and that should show up here in our attribute editor, as blend 3 in this case, and let's change the name to bottom. And again, if you happen to lose that, you can go into your Hypershade and find it. There's bottom, and you would just select that. And that will bring it into your attribute editor. So let's make that a little bit brighter. Let's add the bottom texture to it. Go to File, and then go into this folder and look for Can Bottom. That's the one we want, and then it applies it. And again, we need to enter our data into the channel box. So let's go to the channel box, Layer Editor, Place Texture, scroll down, and then let's get our data. So it's repeat U is 3, repeat V is 3, like in the top, and let's go ahead and enter that. And then our offset U is 5 thousandths, and our offset V is also 5 thousandths. Okay, and so now we've got our complete can, top and bottom label. It's looking pretty realistic. Now it's time to animate. You thought it was fun up to this point, it's really going to get fun now. We're going to add bones and joints in order to make this thing dance. So the first thing we want to do is change the mode. Let's go up into the upper left here where it says Modeling, and let's change now to Rigging. Now we're in the rigging mode, and so we have a new set of menus. We're going to go into the skeleton and then drop down and select Create Joints. Now in order to do a skeleton, we need to do that in an orthographic view so the skeleton and the joints know where to go. So press the space bar, and let's do that in the front. And press the 4 key so that we see the wireframe. And we're going to start at the base and click right in the middle here at the bottom, and that creates a joint. Then go up to about the middle between these two lines that we cut. So right about the middle there, and click again, and then click again at the top. That'll be the top joint. Now you've got those three. Hit return or enter, and we're out of the joint creation and we're into the select mode. Now you can see we have a skeleton, our first skeleton with three joints. We have joint number 1, joint number 2, and joint number 3. And in order to find those, I want to show you another window, a very, very handy window. It's called the outliner. So to find that, you go into Windows and drop down it, select Outliner, and that brings up this window which shows you everything in your scene. You can see your perspective camera and your different other cameras for the orthographic views. Select the can, and so you can select anything you want here in the outliner. And notice that here you have joint 1, and click over here on the plus sign, and that opens that up so you can see that joint 2 is parented to joint 1 and joint 3 is parented to joint 2. So the first parent is joint 1, then the first child of joint 1 is joint 2, and you can see as I select them that they're highlighted. And the third child is joint 3, and that's just this joint up here. So you can discreetly select them, anything you want in the outliner. Very, very handy window, very, very important. And it also, you can see it has different textures that you can select as well. So I'm going to slide that over to my other monitor, and if you have two monitors you can do that, or just keep it handy, or you can also minimize it. So now we're going to attach the skin of the can to these joints. Make sure that they're selected. You can either select it by selecting joint 1, and then or you can select it, as I said, in the outliner. You can select joint 1 in the outliner, but make sure it's joint 1 that you have selected, because you want all three of the joints and the whole skeleton highlighted. And then we're going to after that select the skin of the model. So to select them both, hold down the shift key and then select the skin. What we're going to do now is bind the skin to the skeleton. And in order to do that, we go up to Skin in the menu, the drop down, and simply select Bind Skin. And once it's bound, you see it's got change in the color for the skin. That means it's bound. Now let's go to the texture view mode, and you can see that when you go into the select mode that you've got the texture and the skeleton. And let's animate this thing. In order to see the bones, let's press the 4 key, and we're going to do some animating now. And I want to rotate the view so that we can see the label from the front. So select the bottom joint, joint 1, press the E key so we can rotate it, and I just want to have the Coca-Cola label centered so that when we animate it, it'll animate with that in the front, and that'll be more prominent. We want the animation to take place in the center joint. So to see it, let's press the 4 key, and you can just select the center joint. And since we've rotated this, it throws the orientation off a little bit. So we're just going to rotate from the outer ring here, and that rotates in what's called world rather than local, which are these inner ones. This rotates from a world setting. Okay, so let's rotate this. As you see, when I'm rotating it, it changes the rotation up here. I'm not going to give you an exact amount. Let's rotate it just before these two crash together. Right about there. All right, and that's where we're going to start. Now we need to set keyframes for the animation. And that's down here in the timeline. If you look down at the bottom here, you have a timeline, and it defaults to 200 frames, as you can see right down here where my cursor is. And we're able to view 120 of those frames in the timeline. And here's your slider. If you slide that back and forth, you can click on it and drag it, and you can see downstream a little bit further, or you can click on this little square here and drag it, and so you can view all 200 of the frames. So let's leave it at viewing 200 frames. And in order to set a keyframe, make sure you're at the first frame here and press the S key, and that sets a keyframe. Now we want this to rotate one cycle, say every half second, so it's moving fairly fast. Now we're set at 24 frames per second, so if we go down to frame 24, that would be 1 second. As I said, we want it to rotate fairly fast back and forth, and it's going to be cycling. It'll cycle through every half second, and let's set another keyframe there at 12. So click on frame 12, and you can see over in the lower right here that we're on frame 12. That shows you the current frame. So frame 12, click on there. So make sure you clicked on frame 12. We're going to copy this because we want each cycle to bring it back exactly to where it was. So you're on frame 1, right click, go to copy, and then go to frame 12 and paste. Just not paste connect, just paste. And that copies that keyframe to the same position at frame 12. Now we want to go to frame 6, and we're going to rotate this over to the other extreme, right about there, and press the S key, and now we have our first animation. So go to the frame 1, and then you can click and drag and scrub through. And that has our animation. If you want to see it with the label, press the 6 key, and there's our animation. So again, every half second, it'll cycle through. And since it's doing the same thing, we don't have to do it over and over again. We're going to composite this in 3D. So let's take a look at it. We can set it however we want, whatever position. We want to probably ideally show it in a perspective mode here. Pretty good size, and with the top showing somewhat. And we can look at the rotation there, the animation. And maybe we want to have it move a little bit from the bottom too at the same time. So let's click the bottom joint, joint 1. Let's go back into the front view. So again, you have the bottom joint 1 selected. So you go to frame 1, and we're going to rotate it a little bit, and I want to move it up just a little bit so that the bottom is even with the grid there. Then press the S key, and that sets the first keyframe. Then let's right click on that keyframe, copy, go to frame 12 and paste. All right, now let's go to frame 6, and we're going to rotate it to the other side. So as it's dancing, it's going to be bouncing a little bit back and forth on the bottom as well. So let's click on that on the joint, press the E key to rotate it, and so that the other side is touching there. Press the S key, and now we have our full animation. Let's go into the preview mode and we can look at it, cycle through it back and forth, scrubbing through. And it looks pretty good. I want to rotate it so that I can see it, see the top a little bit. And rotate it around. Maybe I want to zoom back a little bit and see the top a little bit better. And let's do a temporary render on this so that we can see what it looks like with everything done. We're going to just render this one frame. So you go up here and where this says render the current frame, just click on that and that'll give us a quick render of what it looks like. Looking pretty good, looks fairly real. And then you can just click out of that. Now what we want to do is export this so that we can composite it over a background in an edit program like Adobe Premiere. But first we have to change the settings into the settings that we want for the export. And we do that by going into this one here. It's called Display Render Settings. Click on that and we need to change the render settings to animation because the render is set by default only to a single frame. So look up here first and you should have Maya software. If you don't, choose it. Okay, and that's under this Common tab. You have two tabs that we're going to be going through, Common and Maya software. Okay, now check your path. Make sure that the path takes you to where you want it to go. Okay, so what we need to do is change the setting and give our project a title here. Okay, so let's go into File, go down to Save Scene As, and navigate to our scene if it's not there, but we already do have our scenes set. So go down to File, Name, and you can name Coke Can Animation. And then Save As. Now you can see that it's up here in the render settings that our path goes down into the Coke Can Images and Coke Can Animation. But see, it's the Maya IFF. We don't want that. We want it to change. So let's go through and set our output settings. So file name is fine for the using the scene name. The image format, we don't want IFF, as I said. We need something with an alpha channel so we can composite it over a background. And so let's choose a PNG or PNG. And again, to get to that, you have to scroll down among these different settings or these different choices. Choose ping. And then from the frame animation extension, see it defaults to single frame. So we need to change that. Click on the arrow to drop down and let's choose name, number, extension. And we want 12 frames. So enter 12, so it'll render from frame 1 to frame 12. That's one cycle. Of course, we're repeating the last frame and the first frame, one after the other, but that's okay. Make sure that you have the renderable camera is perspective and you have an alpha channel selected. And again, in order to composite it over a background, you need to have an alpha channel that cuts out the background and makes the background transparent so that any background can show through. And size-wise, let's make this full HD, 1920 by 1080. And that's good. Let's go to Maya Software, and under Quality, let's select Intermediate Quality. That's good enough for this. And it's going to render fast too, because we don't have a whole lot of information for it to compute. Now, just as a little preview, we're not going to do this right now, but you can do ray tracing so that you have reflections. And if you had other stuff in there in your scene for it to reflect or for it to reflect off of, then you would choose ray tracing. But we're not going to do that here. I just want to give you a little preview of that. You can get some cool shadows and ray tracings and things like that, and reflections and stuff. Okay, so if you got all that, let's click Close. And then we're going to go ahead and render our animation. So get the position that you want. You know, you can move it around or rotate it or whatever. I've pretty much got mine set the way I want it. And you can scrub through it to make sure that it's the way you want it. And think about what you're going to composite it over. You know, if it's going to be on a beach, or if it's going to be up in the sky, or anything like that. I mean, we could actually rotate the camera as well in this animation, but I just want to be able to cycle back and forth through this, keep it simple for this first tutorial. So I'm good with that. And then we're going to render. So in order to render this animation, we need to go up again to the menu set, drop down, and then choose Rendering. Okay, and that changes our menu to the Render menu. Go up to Render, the Render tab menu, and we've already got our renders set. So we know that it's going to render into our images in our folders. So let's go ahead and select Batch Render. And it automatically starts rendering. If you go down here to the bottom here, this shows your status, and it tells you the progress of your rendering. You can see it's rendering very, very fast. It shows you the path, if you can read that fast. But it's already at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and now it's done. Doing the post-processing. And now let's go in the Finder and find our images. Okay, there they are. Okay, and then in temp is the one we did with an IFF label. So here are our renders. You can preview those. Click on it, and then you can see that it's transparent the way it looks back here. You can see a little bit through it behind it, and just press your arrow and you can cycle through. Now, we didn't add a light to this, so that it looks a little bit dark. Let's add a light to it. So let's go back into Maya and go into Create. In fact, let's add a couple of lights. Let's add an ambient light. And let's add, well, let's do a temporary render and see how that looks first. That's looking pretty good. No, I think we should add another light. Let's add a directional light. Okay? You need to move this light around, so rotate, and if the light is selected, make sure it's selected. If you have trouble selecting it, you can select it there in your outliner. And so first we want to move it out from inside the origin area. So press your move tool and move it out to the front. Then let's move it up. And if you need to get oriented, press the 6 key, and then you can see where your orientation is. Okay, so we want to light the front. And then let's rotate it so it's looking down at it or shining down towards it a little bit like that. And then let's move around. See, yeah, it's shining right on the can. It might be a little bright, so we can preview this now pressing the 7 key, and that shows us kind of a preview of what it looks like with the lights. So you have 4, 5, 6, and 7. That might be a little bright. Let's do a temporary render current frame and see how that looks. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to get back to my position now for my animation. I kind of like that. I'm looking down on it a little bit so I can see the top, the pop top. And now let's go ahead and don't forget to save on a regular basis. Command S is to save. And we're going to re-render this. And what happens is it'll re-render over the previous frames that we rendered before, the other 12. And just replace them. So let's go to Render. And then Batch Render. And then watch our progress down here at the bottom. And it's done. So let's go look at them now. They should look better. I'm in preview mode. Yeah, that looks much better, and it looks kind of realistic. All right, at this point, go ahead and close out Maya. First, make sure you save it. Command S and save it. And quit. And let's open up Adobe Premiere. Now, I'm not going to show you all of how to do this because if you've taken my Premiere class or if you've taken visual storytelling, then you should know already how to do this, how to composite. But I'll get you started in importing the animation into Premiere. Okay, so I'm setting this into my Maya Coke can. Okay. And I'm going to save as Coke Canimation. Coke Canimation. So let's go ahead and import. Command I, import the images. We're going to import all 12 of them. And there they are. Let's select all of them. And one important thing here is that you need to have your preferences in Premiere set so that if you're working at, say, 24 frames per second in your animation, or that you import the frames at 1 frame. In order to do that, you go into the preferences for Premiere, and that would be General, and the still images duration you want to have set for 1. A lot of times it'll set it for 5 seconds. You don't want it that. You want 1 frame. And because of the way these images are labeled, we need to do them in order. So let's stretch this out, and so we can see the entire name of each of them. So we want to start with 1. So here's 1. Let's drag that into the timeline. And because if you drag them all in at the same time, they won't be in the proper order because of the way that Premiere has it set up. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and it's optional if you want to use 12 or not, because it's just a repeat of the first one, but I like to have a little hesitation there at the end. All right, so let's move this back over so that we can see it, what we're doing. And you can see as you scrub through that it's doing a nice smooth animation back and forth and cycling. So now what we want to do for this to repeat, let's select them all and then copy and then go to the end and paste. So then now we have 2 cycles, and then select them all again, copy, paste. And then depending on how long we want it to go, we have 1.5 seconds now. We can select the whole thing and say we want it to go for, I think long enough would probably be about 15 seconds. So let's copy and paste, 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 all the way down to about 15 seconds. We're at 16, and that's fine. So now you can see as we scrub through, it cycles through several times. And we're going to want to composite this over a background. And I happen to have a beautiful beach scene. So let's select all of this. Command A to select all of it, and let's move it up to the next track, to video 2. Because we need to have it over the background. The background is going to be video 1. And I have, like I said, I have a beach scene that I want to put in there. So I'm going to import that and navigate to it. And it's called beach. Now I don't need the whole thing, so I'm just going to put in about 15 seconds of it. So I'll go down to about 15. And I did a screen movie capture on this from YouTube. And I'm going to just take the video, and now there it is. But I'd like to have it down on the beach. I'm not going to worry about the shadow right now, but I do want to have it down sitting on the beach. So I'm going to go in tight on that on the first one and set that position. Go into Effect Controls and Position, and the Y position, I'm going to move it down so that it's right there in the middle on the beach. And so it's going to be dancing around. Now I need to move all those other frames too, so I right click on the first frame, copy, and then I'm going to select all the other frames and paste the attributes. Right click, paste attributes, and it'll be motion, for that's the position. Okay, now they'll all be right there in the same place. And as I play it as a preview, you can see it's dancing. And so I can add some music that has a similar rhythm to it, and there you go. Now if I wanted, I could move the can left and right a little bit further, from the base, or move it into different positions, have it bouncing and jumping up into the sky, or zooming back or zooming forward, bouncing forward and backward in the scene. That's up to you. Then after you've added sound effects and music to this, you'll want to export it as usual. Thank you for joining me on this long and sometimes tedious tutorial. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I hope you did too.